Canada's Indian residential schools are a dark chapter in this country's history. As such, the federal government has established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to examine what went on in those schools. And yet, many Canadians aren't aware a commission exists or what its mandate is. Joining us now to detail what Canada can learn from other countries' Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in New York, New York, Eduardo Gonzalez. He is director of the Truth and Memory Program for the International Center for Transitional Justice. And Mr. Gonzalez, as I welcome you to the program from New York, let me just share with our viewers some of the background to what I just described, because from 1874 to the year 1996, more than 150,000 First Nations children were separated from their families and communities in Canada and sent to church and state-run Indian residential schools in an attempt to assimilate them. The experience was pretty terrible. They were prohibited from speaking their native language. They were forbidden from practicing their cultural traditions. They endured physical, sexual, and emotional abuse in many cases. With that background in place, perhaps you could tell us, what does the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission hope to achieve?
Thank you, Steve. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are usually established in the wake of great atrocity. That is why typically the Truth Commissions we know, such as the one in South Africa or the one in Chile, were established after armed conflicts or after dictatorial regimes. The situation in Canada may strike you as very different from South Africa or Chile, but obviously what happens is that indigenous peoples see the history of Canada in a very different way, under a very different light. Clearly, the experience of forced assimilation, mistreatment, losing your kids to be taken away to these educational institutions is an experience that was felt by the indigenous communities, by the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis as extremely traumatic. What Truth Commissions do is basically three things. First of all, they set the record straight. They explain what exactly happened. Second, they give survivors and victims an opportunity to speak directly to the public and to share their experiences, to receive the recognition that they deserve. And third, Truth Commissions usually give recommendations of policy so that you can avoid these situations from happening again.
Again, by way of background, Mr. Gonzalez, in 2006, the Harper government, churches, and indigenous groups agreed to a $2 billion settlement package for the estimated 80,000 living survivors of the residential school system. The deal included the establishment of the Truth Commission and reparations for survivors. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission began on June 1st, 2008, with a 5-year mandate, which is just about up. Aside from the financial reparations, what does the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process offer at this point, do you think, to residential school survivors?
The Truth Commission was a request and a demand from the Assembly of First Nations when it was negotiating this settlement agreement that you have just described. What was pretty obvious for survivors was that they did not feel that the intensity of their experiences would be deleted in some way by a monetary compensation. Survivors said very clearly that they were not after the money. What they wanted was validation and recognition of what they had suffered. Therefore, the Truth Commission was incorporated as one of several elements of the agreement that was passed by the government, the churches, and the Assembly of First Nations. In this particular agreement, Schedule N, what happens is that the Truth Commission is created so that in addition to the rest of the agreement, survivors have the opportunity to talk and to be heard. That is something that the survivors themselves asked. So what I think this Truth Commission does is to actually give a more human and a more approachable experience to this settlement, which would otherwise be basically just a judicial arrangement. What the Truth Commission does is to give depth and to give a more clear, sensitive experience to survivors when they have to deal again with the churches and with government.
And when the Commission finds out about crimes that have been committed in the past, is it able to pursue a kind of a criminal charge aspect to whatever they find out?
The Commission is not a judicial institution. In fact, the Commission has to work basically with the memories and the information that survivors will give. The agreement, if I am not wrong, is clear that the Commission is not contradictory either with the tasks of justice. If the Commission finds information that is clearly information about criminal activity, it will do what every Canadian citizen can do, which is to refer that information to the appropriate authorities. Now, what is the real significant point here is that truth commissions are about the victim, while judicial activity are usually about the perpetrators. What you have in a court of law is a process to determine whether an accused has in fact committed certain actions or not. And what a truth commission does is really to focus on the experiences of the victim and to make the victim and the survivor the center of its activity.
We just put up some information on the screen a moment ago which indicated that you were involved in Perus Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I wonder whether any of the experiences you had associated with that can teach us about what might work with our Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
I worked in the Peruvian Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was established about 10 years ago after the end of a very sad chapter of our history, the end of a dictatorship, the dictatorship of President Alberto Fujimori, and the end of an internal armed conflict between the government of Peru and a terrorist organization called the Shining Path. Our conflict costed about 69,000 lives to Peru. And so when democracy was recovered, the new government created a truth commission, and we heard about 17,000 survivors who came in front of the commission to share their experiences. And we learned a number of things. I mean, one of the things that I can think of right now in terms of what can be useful for Canada is the centrality of victims. What is more significant in the work of a truth commission, in my view, is to listen. It's an act of respectful listening to what survivors have to say. It may be that survivors have a version of what happened that is just partial, that reflects only their particular experience. And certainly a truth commission, on the basis of much information, archival research and other instruments, is going to reconstruct history probably in a different way. However, what is central is not necessarily the final report that you have where you establish the facts as they were, but actually the process of relationship with survivors, listening to them and giving them an opportunity to interact with the wider Canadian public.
Do you have any concerns about how we're proceeding with our Truth and Reconciliation Commission here?
Well, I think that the main challenge for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada was, in a way, the way you opened the program. Many Canadians, non-Aboriginal Canadians, do not know much about the Truth Commission. So for me, the main challenge and what would be my main concern is in what way both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians can work so that they can find out more about what the Truth Commission is doing. And when the Truth Commission issues its findings and recommendations, how do all Canadians engage with that in order to make it a constructive discussion, a constructive dialogue? For me, the concern would be that the Truth Commission does a worthy effort to document what really happened, to give a word and to give the space to the survivors, and that effort in some way ends up in the shelves of a university. That must not happen. What should happen here is that the Truth Commission of Canada opens up the space for all Canadians, Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals, to recognize what happened in the past and to imagine ways in which Canada can be refounded as a country where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal citizens can find a common way.
Well, my hunch, Mr. Gonzalez, is that there is very little awareness among Canadians that this commission exists and is doing its work. And if that's true, then the whole point of allowing people who have been abused in the past to have their stories told and get that draft of history written, well, it's not happening. That's a problem, wouldn't you say?
I think that what the Commission has been doing has been a process of navigating, if you want, very close to the immediate and the expressed needs of survivors. Survivors wanted to tell their stories next to their communities, next to their families, next to circles of trust and confidence. So the different national events that the Commission did were events that drew very closely to those needs and to those expectations. At the same time, I do share the concern that perhaps if that happens, what that will do is to build certainly the trust and the dignity of survivors, the dignity of their communities, but perhaps the opportunity that would be missed in that case is the opportunity to exchange views with the rest of Canada. So perhaps in the year or so that the Truth Commission is still left to carry out its work, this is what can happen. I know that the Truth Commission is going to carry out a national event pretty soon in Montreal, if I'm not wrong, and that would be perhaps a good opportunity to reach out to all Canadians and to show just how an atrocity of the extent of what we are talking about, the mistreatment of children, is something that concerns not just Aboriginals and First Nations, but all Canadians, all people who have a family, who believe that the place for a kid is his or her family, and that families and parents have the right to educate their kids in the way that they see fit.
Okay, Mr. Gonzalez, let's finish up on this. I think we all understand what the truth angle is in this. Victims come forward, they tell their stories, we hear their truths. The reconciliation part sounds like a different and in some ways much more challenging thing. How does that work?
Well, reconciliation clearly is a complicated concept in this dyad that we have set out. Clearly, reconciliation cannot be understood as something automatic and as something that will happen the next day after the Truth Commission closes its doors. Clearly, reconciliation has to be a process. And to make it even more challenging, reconciliation is a long process, a process that engages Canadians, members of a community, at a number of levels. First, clearly there is a psychological, personal level in which survivors particularly need to reconcile with what happened, need to reconcile with their own history, need to accept themselves, and need to embrace their families. Second, there is obviously a political aspect and a political level to this. These events happen for a reason, happen because of marginalization, because of the subordinate place that the official system put indigenous populations in. And therefore, for reconciliation to really happen, it will have to invoke a process of political transformation by which First Nations and non-Aboriginal Canadians see eye to eye on a number of things regarding the future of their country. So I think reconciliation, at least in those levels, the psychological level, the emotional level, therefore, and the political level, the level of policy, will be a difficult and long road. What I hope is that the Truth Commission, on the basis of its findings, will make smart recommendations of policy to repair not just this particular group of Aboriginal people and First Nations that suffered through the experience of the schools, but to help all of Canada, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, to move forward with concrete, constructive policies.
Let's hope you're right. Eduardo Gonzalez, it's good of you to join us on the line from New York City tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your invitation, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.